Why was she always the one left out of the conversation? That question had followed Sarah Mitchell since she was a child, and on some days, it echoed louder than the roar of any engine she would ever fly. In Cedar Falls, Iowa, the world had already written her story before she could speak it. The little girls were meant to play with dolls, practice dance routines, and dream about prom dresses. But Sarah's world was different. Her hands weren't soft with ribbons and lace. They were streaked with grease, cut by tools too heavy for her frame. She wasn't arranging dresses for her dolls. She was arranging the innards of an engine her father had dragged home from the mechanic's shop. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, would lean against the garage wall and watch, half in pride, half in worry. He had seen jungles eat dreams whole. He had seen men who thought themselves invincible collapse under the weight of war. He wondered if his daughter's dreams were any safer. "Dad," she asked once, wiping sweat and grime from her forehead, her eyes lit with the restless fire of curiosity, "how fast do fighter jets really go?" Her father paused, remembering the war that had denied him the sky, remembering friends who had never come home. He finally answered, his voice soft but firm. "Fast enough to touch the stars, sweetheart. Fast enough to touch the stars." It was an answer that took root deep inside her. Every storm, every doubt, every sneer she would later face would be measured against those words. Fast enough to touch the stars. But in small towns, dreams like hers were laughed at. In the 1980s, the world was still carved by invisible lines, some places for men, some places for women. And Sarah was reminded of those lines almost every day. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, delivered it with a smile that stung like a slap. "Honey," she said, chuckling softly, "combat aviation is a man's world. Maybe think about teaching or nursing, something realistic." That word, realistic, burned her more than failure ever could. Realistic was a cage built from the bones of other people's fear. Her mother, Elena, saw the wound in her daughter's eyes that night. Elena had worked 2 jobs for as long as Sarah could remember, her hands blistered, her back aching, yet her spirit unbroken. She pulled Sarah close, spoke in her soft Spanish accent, and said the words that would never leave her. "Mija, the sky does not care if you are a boy or a girl. It only cares if you have the courage to claim it." From then on, courage became her secret compass. When the bus finally came to take her to the Air Force Academy, the entire town seemed to gather, as though curious to see if the strange little girl with oil-stained hands would really go through with it. Some whispered doubts, others offered forced encouragement. But Sarah heard none of it. She only heard the rhythm of her father's last words at the bus station. "Show them what Mitchell women are made of." The academy was a crucible. One of only 37 women in a sea of more than 1,000 cadets, she was a small figure in a world designed to crush the weak. Physical training was relentless. Academic challenges nearly drowned her. And the social isolation, eating alone, walking past whispered jokes, facing the invisible wall of exclusion, cut deeper than any wound the body could feel. There were nights when she lay in her narrow dorm bed staring at the ceiling, asking herself if she belonged, if maybe Mrs. Henderson had been right all along. But then she would close her eyes and see the garage, the engine parts spread out like a puzzle, her father's voice echoing, "Fast enough to touch the stars." That voice carried her into her sophomore year, when something began to shift. In advanced aerodynamics, she started to outpace everyone. She saw patterns in airflow, tactical maneuvers, flight equations, patterns others missed. Colonel James Wright, her instructor, a decorated pilot with lines on his face carved by years of combat, noticed. "Mitchell," he said after class one day, his voice low, measured, "you have something special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words were different from encouragement. They weren't sentimental. They were recognition, and recognition was oxygen in a place built to suffocate. Then came the real test, her first solo flight. The T-6 Texan trainer stood waiting for her on the runway like a sleeping beast. Its wings shimmered in the sun. Her hands trembled as she strapped in, not from fear of crashing, but from the weight of the moment. She was about to step into the sky not as a passenger, not as a dreamer, but as a pilot. The engine roared awake beneath her touch, a living thing bound to her heartbeat. As she pushed forward, the world blurred and then flight. At 3,000 feet, alone in the endless blue, she felt it, the silence of the earth beneath her, the quilt of fields stretching forever, the hum of wings that seemed to know her soul. She wasn't just flying an aircraft. She was stepping into the life she was meant for. When she landed, Colonel Wright was waiting. He studied her expression like a man measuring truth. "How did it feel up there, Cadet Mitchell?" She didn't hesitate. "Like coming home, sir." From that moment the air was hers. But the path ahead was still paved with battles no less fierce than enemy fire. Fighter pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base would strip cadets down to their nerves. Jets demanded reflexes sharper than instinct, minds faster than machines, and hearts steady even when death brushed close. Sarah thrived. Instructors whispered about her calm under pressure, her precision in combat simulations, her eerie ability to think 3 moves ahead in aerial combat. Some said she had ice in her veins, but the truth was softer. She wasn't cold. She was focused. There was one exercise that would follow her into legend. 4 F-16s against an aggressor squadron. Within minutes, 2 of her fellow pilots were shot down by simulated missiles. Outnumbered 4-1, Sarah had no logical path to victory. Protocol would have told her to call for backup, retreat, accept defeat. Instead, she broke every pattern they expected. She skimmed the desert floor so low her jet nearly kissed the sand. Radar struggled to trace her. She used the terrain like a cloak, each canyon, each ridge, an ally. One by one, she struck back, eliminating her opponents until silence reigned in the control room. When she landed, Major Patricia Lopez, the first female combat pilot Sarah had ever trained under, met her with tears in her eyes. "In 15 years of training pilots, I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just fly that plane, Sarah. You became it." Word spread like wildfire. Her name began to echo in briefing rooms she had never entered. She wasn't just another cadet anymore. She was the one who had done the impossible. But even as her reputation grew, she carried it quietly. Recognition was not the goal. The sky was. Her first assignment as a fighter pilot came soon after, and with it, the weight of real war. F-16 Fighting Falcons, deployments, combat missions over the Middle East. Before her first mission, suiting up in gear heavier than she'd ever worn, Sarah felt the voices of every woman who had been told no pressing against her chest. She carried them with her, not as a burden but as armor. The sortie was a success. More missions followed. Dozens. Each one carried her deeper into the dangerous rhythm of war. She learned the truth of combat, the moments of unbearable waiting, the sudden burst of violence, the quiet afterward that no one spoke about but everyone carried home. Commendations came. Ranks climbed. The girl who had once been told to dream smaller was now carving her name into the sky. But Sarah never saw herself as a hero. She saw herself as a pilot who owed her best to those who fought on the ground, to those who needed her precision, her calm, her courage. What she didn't yet know was that her most defining moment was still years away, waiting in the shadow of the Hindu Kush Mountains. A meeting with a Navy SEAL team. A mission that would test not just her skills, but her very soul. And it would all begin with a single question in a briefing room, delivered by a SEAL captain whose words would change her forever. "Any combat pilots?" Why had Colonel Park's expression changed the moment he walked into the room? Sarah had seen him wear many faces, anger, fatigue, pride, but this was different. Behind him stood a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp and cold like a rifle sight fixed on its target. Major Mitchell, Park said, I'd like you to meet Captain Marcus Thompson, Navy SEALs. He has a unique situation that requires our assistance. Unique, that word made Sarah sit up straighter. Thompson extended his hand. His grip was firm, his silence heavier than most men's words. When he finally spoke, it was in the low, gravel-rough voice of someone who had lived too close to danger for too long. Major, my team has been tracking a high-value target in Tora Bora for 3 weeks. Intelligence says he's planning something big. We need air support tomorrow night, but it won't be a standard close air support mission. Sarah studied the satellite images he laid out on the table. A compound nestled deep in a narrow valley, walled in by cliffs that seemed to touch the sky. The valley floor only 200 meters wide. On either side, 3,000-foot walls of rock. Impossible for traditional bombing, Thompson explained. Risk of avalanche is too high, too close to civilian areas, too much precision required. That's where you come in. Her eyes flicked over the details, entry points, terrain, the insertion zone. She felt the challenge instantly. This was flying at the edge of what an F-16 could do. It wasn't just about skill. It was about nerve, instinct, and an unwillingness to blink when death leaned close. What makes this different from the other ops you've supported? She asked, her tone calm but curious. Thompson's gaze didn't waver. If things go sideways, you won't just be support. You'll be our lifeline, extracting us under fire if necessary. Colonel Park cleared his throat. Captain Thompson specifically requested you, Major. Word of your precision has reached the community. There was a beat of silence. Respect and expectation collided inside her. For years she had fought to prove herself worthy of standing among the best. And now, someone from the outside, from the world of shadows and impossible missions, was asking for her by name. What's the timeline? She asked. Wheels up, 2200 hours tomorrow, Thompson replied. My team inserts at 22:30. You'll be our overwatch from 15,000 feet. Precision strikes only. 30-minute window before reinforcements arrive. She nodded slowly, already assembling possibilities in her mind. But one thought lingered beneath the professionalism. He doesn't talk like most men I've worked with. He doesn't condescend. He doesn't overcompensate. He treats me like a warrior. That night, while the base settled into its fragile rhythm of quiet before dawn, Sarah walked to the chapel. She wasn't religious, but the silence there gave her room to breathe, to think. She hadn't expected company. 10 minutes later, Thompson walked in, his steps soft, almost reluctant. He slid into a pew near the back. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The stillness between them felt oddly comfortable. Then his voice came, quiet like a confession. My wife thinks I'm insane for volunteering for these missions. 3 kids at home, and here I am, chasing ghosts through Afghan mountains. Sarah turned slightly. His profile was rough with fatigue, his eyes shadowed but steady. What keeps you going? She asked. He hesitated, then answered with the weight of someone who had wrestled the truth too many nights to count. The same thing that keeps you flying combat missions. Knowing that maybe, just maybe, what we do keeps something terrible from happening back home. Her throat tightened. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't empty patriotism. It was the burden every combat veteran carried, the silent weight of unseen lives saved. I've read your file, Thompson continued after a pause. 63 combat missions, 0 friendly fire, 18 confirmed precision strikes. Those numbers aren't statistics. Their lives are people who went home because of you. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. Commendations never meant much to her. But hearing this, spoken by someone who lived in the same brutal world, someone who understood the cost, that meant everything. The next day blurred into long hours of planning. Maps, drone footage, escape routes. Thompson treated her like part of his team, not an outsider, not an accessory. Every time he asked for her assessment, she noticed the quiet respect in his eyes. and it ignited something inside her. This is how it should be. Not men and women, just soldiers, just warriors. When the mission night arrived, the Afghan sky was mercilessly clear. A beautiful danger. Clear skies meant perfect visibility for her and for the enemy. Sarah walked the length of her jet, running her hand along its fuselage like a ritual. She checked every detail twice. One loose bolt could become a death sentence in a canyon that narrow. As she climbed into the cockpit, the world narrowed. The chatter of mechanics faded. The distant clatter of helicopters blurred. Her heartbeat slowed. The ritual transformation began, from woman, daughter, dreamer, into pilot. 45 minutes into the flight, the mountains rose ahead like jagged teeth in the moonlight. She heard Thompson's voice over the radio, steady, clipped. Overwatch, this is ground team. We're in position, beginning final approach. She adjusted her flight path, circling high above the valley. Her sensors scanned every shadow. Below, the seals moved like ghosts through rock and dust. Everything seemed under control. Until it was. The first explosion tore through the silence, lighting up the valley like noonday sun. Then gunfire, wild, heavy, pouring from the ridges. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire. Thompson's voice cracked through the static, urgent. Multiple enemy positions, more than intel reported. We're pinned. Immediate close air support required. Sarah's pulse surged, but her voice stayed calm. Ground team, I count 6 enemy positions, but I need confirmation on your location. Thermal imaging is compromised. Negative, Thompson shouted. We can't mark, we're too exposed. Any movement draws fire. It was the nightmare scenario. A crossfire, 6 machine gun nests, a team trapped in a natural bowl with no way out, and she couldn't risk a single miscalculated strike. One mistake and she wouldn't just miss the enemy, she would kill the very men she was trying to save. She exhaled slowly. This is why you're here. Ground team, she said firmly. I'm making a low pass. Stay absolutely still for 30 seconds. Overwatch, negative, Thompson barked. You'll be over anti-air positions, too dangerous. Her hands were already adjusting the throttle. Captain, with respect, danger is my job. Hold position. She dove. The F-16 cut through the valley like a blade, barely 500 feet above the floor, cliffs flashing past her wingtips. The ground fire lit up around her, tracers clawing at the dark. But she kept her eyes fixed on her instruments, her sensors, her gut. There, a cluster of heat signatures, distinct from the chaotic spread of enemy fire. Thompson's team, pinned behind a boulder formation. She had them. Climbing hard, she broke free of the canyon, breath-sharp, hands steady. Ground team, I have your position. Prepare for danger, close support. I'm working north to south. Stay down. Overwatch, that's within 100 meters, Thompson warned. I've done this 63 times without hitting friendlies, she replied, voice low, unwavering. Trust me. The first missile streaked down and silenced a nest on a rocky outcropping. Cannon fire followed, ripping into the second, the third. Each strike measured, precise. The valley echoed with fire and thunder. For 10 minutes, she carved death into the semicircle of enemies, protecting men she had never touched, never spoken to, but felt bound to with unbreakable purpose. 5 nests down, 1 left. But the 6th sat in a ravine so narrow it demanded an insane run, 50 meters of clearance, crosswinds, ground fire from multiple angles. Doctrine would say, abort, wait, find another way. But Doctrine wasn't watching Thompson's team run low on ammunition. Doctrine didn't see the reinforcements moving closer on the ridges. Doctrine wasn't responsible for lives about to be swallowed whole. Ground team, stay down, I'm making the run. Overwatch, you don't need to. She cut him off, I do. The canyon closed around her like a throat. Crosswinds shoved the jet, the warning alarm screamed. But her hands were steady, her focus absolute. The missile streaked, struck, and silence followed. The 6th nest was gone. Climbing out, she finally allowed herself a breath. All enemy positions eliminated, area clear for extraction. There was a pause, then Thompson's voice, heavy with something more than relief. Outstanding work, Overwatch. That was the finest display of close air support I've ever seen. For Sarah, there was no victory cry, no fist pump. Just the steady hum of her jet and the quiet knowledge that tonight, men would go home alive because she had done her job. But the true weight of it would not come until hours later, when she walked into the debriefing room at Bagram. The SEALs were already there, dirt-streaked, exhausted. When she entered, Thompson stood, not out of protocol, out of respect. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "I want you to meet the pilot who saved our lives." The hardened warriors looked at her with something she had rarely seen from men like them: gratitude, unguarded and real. Sarah lowered her gaze, uncomfortable under the intensity, but deep inside something shifted. For once, she wasn't the girl who had to prove she belonged. She was simply the pilot who had delivered. And that was enough. Why did Thompson ask for her by name again? Sarah had been requested before, but this felt different. Word was spreading fast. The special operations community was small, but its stories traveled like wildfire. Pilots came and went. Competent, good, sometimes even great. But this was different. The SEALs weren't just asking for an aircraft overhead. They were asking for her. It was 6 weeks after the Tora Bora mission when Thompson found her again. His voice was calm, his eyes clear, but beneath them she read the weight of another impossible task. "This one will be worse," he said bluntly. "Vertical terrain, caves, enemy fighters dug into the cliff face like ants in stone. We'll be rappelling down in the dark. No cover. You'll be our only shield." Sarah studied the maps, the satellite images, the grainy drone footage. A sheer rock wall 800 feet high, riddled with black mouths of caves. Defensive positions carved into the stone, invisible from above until they fired. It was a death trap for ground forces. "What's your minimum standoff?" she asked. 200 meters, Thompson replied. "But the cave openings are small, tiny targets." Sarah allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Captain, I can put a missile through a window from 200 meters. Your caves won't be a problem." He didn't smile back, but his eyes flickered. He believed her. Still, she wanted her own eyes on the terrain. The next morning, under the guise of a reconnaissance run, Sarah flew over the cliff in daylight. Her sensors revealed more than any satellite could: hidden defensive positions, secondary tunnels, a network more complex than the intelligence brief had promised. She marked each detail, storing them in memory. She wasn't just planning an op. She was memorizing the bones of the mountain. That night, the mission began. From 12,000 feet, she watched the SEALs descend, ropes swinging like fragile threads against the vast wall of stone. They looked impossibly small, vulnerable, exposed. Each movement deliberate, each second a gamble against gravity and enemy fire. 20 minutes in, Thompson's voice came sharp over comms. "Overwatch, multiple contacts. Heavy fire from at least 12 positions. We're taking casualties if you don't suppress." Sarah's eyes locked on the muzzle flashes that lit up the rock face like fireflies of death. The SEALs dangled in the open, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. "Ground team, identify your target cave," she ordered, her voice steady. 300 feet level, third opening from the left. All others are hostile, clear to engage. She banked sharply, aligning her approach. Her first strike had to be perfect. The cave was 10 feet wide, carved into solid rock. A heavy machine gun spat fire, sweeping the cliff with lethal arcs. The SEALs hugged the wall, their ropes shivering with impact. Sarah dropped a single missile, guiding it with surgical precision. The explosion ripped the cave apart, echoing through the mountains like thunder. Dust billowed, then cleared. Silence where the gun had been. "Target neutralized," she reported. Thompson's reply was immediate. Beautiful shot, Overwatch, moving forward. Over the next half hour, Sarah became a surgeon in the sky. 8 separate positions, one by one, eliminated with terrifying accuracy. Cannon fire into narrow openings, missiles into reinforced bunkers. She threaded her strikes between the seals like a weaver working a fragile cloth. Each shot was calculated not just to kill, but to protect. But as the last enemy position fell silent, a new threat appeared. Headlights. Vehicles winding up the valley road carrying reinforcements. Dozens of fighters, maybe more. ETA 15 minutes. The SEALs needed 20. Sarah felt her chest tighten. The math didn't work. Ground team, she called, her tone low. You've got a convoy approaching from the south. 6 vehicles, reinforcements, ETA 15. Thompson's voice came back hard. We need 20 to extract. Can you delay them? She stared at the tactical display. The road was narrow, hugging a cliff. One side rock, the other a plunge into darkness. Yes, there was a way, dangerous, untested, but a way. Ground team, she said, I'm going to trigger a controlled avalanche. Stand by for heavy explosions. There was a pause. Avalanche, Thompson echoed. Sarah was already adjusting altitude, lining up. Captain, trust me. She climbed, seeking the right angle. Her sensors marked stress points in the cliff face. It would take precision beyond anything she had ever attempted. Too little force, and the rocks would shift without falling. Too much, and she could bring half the mountain down, possibly burying Thompson's team along with the enemy. Her first missile struck. The mountain shivered. A second, a third, the cracks deepened. Then, with a sound like the earth itself breaking open, the cliff collapsed. Thousands of tons of rock roared down, smashing into the narrow road, swallowing the convoy. Dust and fire filled the valley. When it cleared, the road was gone, buried beneath an ocean of stone. The reinforcements were trapped on the far side, powerless. The valley went silent. Outstanding work, Overwatch, Thompson's voice came, raw with awe. That avalanche just saved our lives. Sarah exhaled slowly, her knuckles white on the controls. She had gambled everything on those strikes, and she had won. The SEALs extracted, every man alive, every objective secured. But what stayed with her was not the success. It was the realization. Thompson hadn't questioned her, not once, not about her judgment, not about her gender. He had simply trusted her because her skill had earned it. Back at Bagram, the chatter had changed. She was no longer a novelty, no longer the female pilot. She was the pilot, the one the SEALs wanted overhead. And yet the respect of others was what weighed on her most that night. What lingered was the look in Thompson's eyes when she landed. Not gratitude, not even relief, something deeper, recognition. The recognition of a warrior who had found his equal. Weeks later, General Patricia Williams herself flew in to meet her, the highest-ranking woman in the Air Force, a legend. Major Mitchell, she said, her tone crisp but warm. Your work with special operations units has reached the highest levels. What you're doing, this partnership with Captain Thompson's team, it's changing how we think about air support. Sarah deflected the praise. It's the teamwork, ma'am. We train together, plan together. That's what makes it work. The general's eyes sharpened. Exactly, and we want to expand it. The Pentagon is creating a new program, Air Force pilots embedded permanently with special operations. We want you to be the first. It was more than an honor. It was a chance to shape the future, to prove that excellence had no gender. She accepted without hesitation. But even as she stepped into this new role, she sensed what was coming. A mission was already being planned, a mission unlike any other, a fortress in the Spinar Mountains, multiple high-value targets, impossible defenses. The kind of mission that military historians would study for decades. And it would begin with words spoken in a briefing room, words that would echo through her life, through history itself. Any combat pilots? Why was the room so quiet? Sarah had sat through dozens of briefings in her career, some filled with chatter, others tense with anger, a few vibrating with anticipation. But this one carried a silence that felt alive, as if the air itself knew what was about to unfold. The secure conference room at Bagram Airfield was packed. It was dawn, cold, the kind of morning when the Afghan mountains seemed like frozen sentinels. The mission was called Operation Thunder Ridge, and the people assembled here were the sharpest blades the American military had to offer. Navy SEALs, Army Delta, Marine Force Recon, Air Force controllers, all of them hard-eyed, all of them veterans of shadows and blood. Sarah slipped into her seat, the only woman in the room. She felt the eyes, some curious, some doubtful, a few dismissive. She had lived in these silences before. She knew how they tested you. At the head of the table stood Captain James Richardson, Navy legend, a man whose reputation had been forged in impossible missions. His voice carried the authority of someone who expected obedience without question. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone sharp as a blade, "this is our best chance to eliminate the leadership coordinating attacks across the region. The target is a heavily fortified compound in the Spinar Mountains. Multiple high-value individuals on site, heavily armed defenders, surface-to-air systems already proven effective. Traditional insertion is impossible." The display flickered to life, showing satellite imagery. Sarah studied the terrain, a fortress carved into the mountains, protected by altitude, defended by weapons designed to swat down anything that flew too close. It was the kind of objective that planners called suicidal until someone was ordered to make it real. Richardson's voice was even clinical, but the words were heavy. "We will require unprecedented coordination between air and ground units, precision fire support, adaptability under extreme conditions. This is no standard op." Sarah felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. Every detail screamed risk. The cliffs, the choke points, the narrow valley that would funnel them into perfect kill zones. Even a slight miscalculation could cascade into disaster. And then the moment. Captain Thompson rose from his seat. His presence filled the room without effort. He didn't posture, didn't grandstand. He simply spoke, and men listened. "Sir," he said, his tone deliberate, "I recommend Major Sarah Mitchell for air support. I've worked with her. She's the only pilot I trust for this." The reaction was immediate. A murmur rippled through the room. Surprise, skepticism, a few raised eyebrows. Some eyes shifted toward Sarah, measuring her, judging her, dismissing her before she spoke. Richardson didn't show emotion, but Sarah felt his doubt. "Captain Thompson," he said, "this mission will push us beyond our limits. Are you certain Major Mitchell is prepared for this complexity?" Before Thompson could answer, Richardson turned to the room, and in a single moment he changed everything. "I'll ask plainly," he said. His gaze swept over the assembled operators. "Any combat pilots here who believe they can handle the air support for Thunder Ridge?" The silence was immediate, heavy, absolute. Sarah felt every eye shift, felt the judgment in their gaze, the unspoken questions. She was the only one, the only pilot, the only woman. Her heart pounded, but not with fear, with clarity. This was more than a briefing. It was a reckoning. If she rose, she wasn't just volunteering for a mission. She was carrying the weight of every woman who had ever been told no, every girl who had been laughed at, dismissed, diminished. If she failed, it wouldn't just be her career that shattered. It would be the door behind her, slamming shut for those who might follow. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she stayed seated. The silence burned, the weight pressed. She thought of Cedar Falls, of greasy engines in the garage, of her father's voice, fast enough to touch the stars, of her mother's whisper, "The sky does not care if you are a boy or a girl. It only cares if you have the courage to claim it." She thought of Thompson's trust, of the SEALs' faces after Tora Bora, of standing in the chapel, hearing the confession of a man who lived with the same burden she carried. And she rose. Not fast, not dramatic, quietly, deliberately. The scrape of her chair against the floor was the loudest sound in the room. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence work, let her presence say what words could not. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and met Richardson's eyes. "Major Mitchell reporting, sir," she said, her voice steady, confident, unshaken. "I can handle the air support requirements for Operation Thunder Ridge." It was not a boast, not a plea, it was a statement of fact. The room reacted like a living thing. Some looked surprised, others impressed, a few skeptical still. But Thompson smiled, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, and several SEALs who had fought under her protection nodded with approval. Richardson studied her for a long moment. His gaze was sharp, testing. He was not a man easily convinced, but Sarah didn't flinch. She met him with the same quiet determination that had carried her through every trial. Finally, he nodded once, a decision that would echo in military history. "Very well, Major Mitchell. You are our primary air support for Operation Thunder Ridge. Don't let us down." Her reply was simple, direct, final. "I won't, sir." The words hung in the air like a promise. What followed was 72 hours of relentless preparation. Mission planning so intricate it bordered on obsession. Sarah worked side by side with Thompson's team, rehearsing every detail, every contingency. She flew simulators until the flight paths burned into her muscles. She studied terrain maps until the mountain felt like an old enemy whose moves she could predict. The mission demanded more than skill. It demanded creativity, trust, and the willingness to do what doctrine said could not be done. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were forgotten. The world shrank to the size of a valley in the Spinar Mountains and the fortress that waited there. But through the exhaustion, through the weight of what was coming, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt before. Not just inclusion, not just acceptance. She felt necessity. She was no longer the pilot fighting to prove herself. She was the pilot they needed. And that truth carried her into the night before the mission, when she found herself once again in the chapel. The same quiet walls, the same silence. But this time she wasn't searching for strength. She was gathering it piece by piece for what lay ahead. She whispered into the empty air, not a prayer but a promise. "I will not let them down." Hours later, when she walked back into the hangar, the F-16 stood waiting, cold metal gleaming in dim light, a machine built for speed, precision, and war. But to Sarah, it felt like more than a weapon. It was her voice, her proof, her way of showing the world that courage didn't roar. Sometimes it rose quietly. Why did the night feel sharper than usual? Sarah had flown under countless skies, cloudless, storm-racked, moonlit, pitch black. But this night was different. It wasn't the weather. It was the silence before history bent. Her F-16 sat fueled and armed, the ground crew's voices hushed as if they too understood what was at stake. She ran her hand along the fuselage like a ritual. The jet was more than a machine. It was her partner, her shield, her weapon, her voice. "Mitchell," Thompson said as he passed her on the tarmac, his gear heavy on his shoulders, his team already loading into the helicopters. His eyes caught hers for the briefest second. No words, just trust. That was enough. She climbed into the cockpit, strapping herself in with practiced precision. Switches flipped, screens glowed, the engine's growl rose, shaking her chest, and with it her heartbeat steadied. The transformation was complete. Sarah Mitchell, daughter, dreamer, outsider, dissolved. Overwatch was born. Takeoff was smooth, almost deceptively so. But as the F-16 clawed into the Afghan sky, the weight of the mission pressed against her shoulders. This wasn't just another combat sortie. This was Thunder Ridge. The mission whispered about even before it began. The mission most believed was impossible. The mountains rose in the distance, jagged black teeth against the stars. She approached at altitude, sensors sweeping, her mind locked into the rhythm of war. "Overwatch, this is ground team," Thompson's voice crackled through comms. "Insertion complete, moving toward the objective." "Copy, ground team," Sarah replied. Her tone was calm, clipped, the cadence of a pilot who had burned doubt out of her vocabulary. From 15,000 feet she scanned the valley. On the surface it seemed quiet, too quiet, no movement, no heat signatures outside the compound, which meant one thing: the enemy was waiting. And they didn't wait long. The first streak of fire shot upward, a surface-to-air missile, glowing like a comet. Sarah reacted instantly, banking hard, countermeasures flaring from her jet. The missile veered, detonating harmlessly in the night sky. Her breathing didn't change. Her voice stayed steady. "Ground team, SAM launch confirmed. Hostiles are awake." "Copy, Overwatch. We're approaching the outer wall. Expect heavy contact." Seconds later, the valley exploded with light. Tracers poured from bunkers hidden in rock. Mortars lit the sky. The compound came alive with firepower meant to obliterate anything that dared approach. "Overwatch, we're taking fire." Thompson's voice was sharp, strained. "Multiple enemy positions, need suppression now." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She didn't dive immediately. Not yet. First came the scan. She marked positions: here, a bunker cut into the cliff. There, a nest camouflaged beneath netting. Heat signatures lined up in her display like pieces on a deadly chessboard. "Ground team, hold your position," she ordered. "Targets acquired, danger close, stay down." She descended. The valley walls closed in, towering like giants. Crosswinds buffeted her jet. The alarm screamed. But Sarah's hands were steady, her focus absolute. Her first missile struck the bunker on the ridge. Fire erupted, then silence. She pivoted, strafing with cannon fire, short, controlled bursts that chewed through enemy lines without touching the compound's fragile walls. One by one, she dismantled their defenses. Target 1 eliminated, Target 2 neutralized, moving to Target 3. Her voice was calm, but inside, she felt the razor's edge. Every strike was within meters of Thompson's team. Every second she delayed could cost lives. "Overwatch, multiple reinforcements inbound from the East Ridge," Thompson shouted. Her sensors confirmed it, enemy fighters pouring into the valley, climbing down goat paths carved into the cliffs. Dozens, maybe more. Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't hesitate. She dove again, her jet skimming the ridge line, engines howling against stone. Missiles streaked into the paths, collapsing trails, scattering fighters like ants. Cannon fire tore through those who pushed forward. The valley shook with thunder, smoke, and flame. Still the enemy pressed, and still the SEALs pushed forward. Minutes blurred into eternity. Sarah flew like a phantom, striking, climbing, diving, weaving between mountain walls that left no room for error. Her jet was an extension of her body, her instincts sharper than fear. Then came the voice she dreaded. "Overwatch, we're compromised inside the compound. Multiple hostiles, close quarters. Extraction may be required." Her blood ran cold. Extraction was worst case. Helicopters couldn't get in under this fire, which meant only one thing: she would have to go lower, lower than doctrine allowed, lower than common sense permitted. She steadied her breath. "Ground team, mark your fallback point, I'll cover." There was no hesitation in Thompson's voice. "Copy. Fallback coordinates sent. Overwatch, if this goes bad, you cut the sky open for us." "Always," she replied. The battle raged. She struck enemy positions at angles no pilot dared attempt, threading missiles between walls of stone. She risked anti-air fire with every pass, her jet dancing between death and destiny. At one point, a missile lock screamed in her headset. She had seconds. She dove into the canyon, alarms shrieking, pulled a maneuver that brushed the edge of physics. The missile overshot, detonating harmlessly above. Her breath came sharp, but her voice never broke. "Overwatch status," Thompson demanded. "Still with you," she answered. And she was. For nearly an hour, Sarah Mitchell bent the laws of combat to shield men on the ground. When the SEALs finally broke from the compound, carrying their wounded and their intel, she carved a path for them. Every hostile position that threatened their retreat was erased by her precision. Then came the final test. Enemy reinforcements surged down the valley, a last desperate attempt to cut off the extraction. Dozens of fighters, heavy weapons, too many for the SEALs to fight through. "Overwatch, we need the road blocked," Thompson shouted. Sarah's eyes locked on the cliffs. She remembered the avalanche at the caves, the impossible precision. "Copy," she said. "Stand clear." She climbed, lined up, and released 3 missiles into the mountain's weakest points. Rock and dust exploded downward, sealing the valley in a roaring landslide. The reinforcements vanished beneath tons of stone. Silence followed, a terrible, beautiful silence. "Ground team, road blocked," she reported. Thompson's reply was raw, almost reverent. "Overwatch, you just bought us our lives." Minutes later, helicopters lifted the SEALs from the extraction point, all alive. Mission accomplished. Sarah circled high above, her chest tight, her hands trembling only now after it was over. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled, the weight of what she had done pressing heavy. When she landed at Bagram hours later, the hangar was quiet, waiting. Thompson's team was already there, exhausted, bloodied, alive. As Sarah stepped from her jet, Thompson stood. He didn't salute. He didn't speak. He simply held her gaze. Then, in front of everyone, he did something that shocked even his own men. He saluted her. And the room understood. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just flown air support. She had redefined it. She hadn't just proven herself. She had proven that excellence had no gender, no barrier, no apology. She had risen quietly and changed everything. Why was the debriefing room so full? Sarah had been through countless post-mission reviews. Usually they were perfunctory. A handful of officers, a slideshow of maps and timelines, a checklist of lessons learned. But today was different. Today the room was packed. Not just Air Force personnel. The entire SEAL team, senior commanders from multiple branches. Even faces she didn't recognize, men with stars on their shoulders, the kind who never came to debriefs unless history had just been written. She walked in, still carrying the dust of the cockpit on her skin. The room fell silent, and then, quietly, deliberately, Captain Marcus Thompson stood. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying through the room like a charge, "I want you to meet the pilot who saved our lives." Major Sarah Mitchell delivered the most precise, professional close air support I've seen in 15 years of special operations. The SEALs, men hardened by years of impossible missions, turned to her. Their expressions were not casual, not polite. They were raw, unguarded, and full of something she rarely saw from soldiers like them: gratitude. Sarah lowered her gaze. The weight of it was too much to meet head-on, but inside something stirred. For once she wasn't being tolerated. She wasn't being tested. She wasn't an exception to a rule. She was simply theirs. Colonel Park led the debrief, methodical as always. Slide by slide, he walked through the operation. But this time, Thompson's commentary interwove like a second narration. His voice carried technical precision, recalling each moment with a soldier's clarity. "At 22:47, he said, "we were pinned down, 6 enemy positions. Major Mitchell's assessment was accurate within 30 seconds. Her low-altitude pass, despite anti-air threats, gave us the situational awareness we needed. Without it, we'd have been blind." Sarah sat listening, almost disbelieving. He wasn't just praising her. He was chronicling her. Each maneuver, each strike, each decision laid out not as luck, not as instinct, but as mastery. When he reached the canyon run, his tone shifted. The final strike required her to fly through a gap barely wider than her aircraft, at night, under fire. That maneuver wasn't just skill. It was artistry. It was the difference between us making it out or being buried in those mountains. Silence followed, heavy, undeniable. When the formalities ended, Thompson approached her privately. The mask of the professional soldier softened, just enough for truth to slip through. "Major," he said quietly, "I've worked with many pilots, some good, some great, a few exceptional, but what you did, it was beyond exceptional. You didn't just save us. You changed how I see air support." Sarah nodded, words caught in her throat. Praise from commanders, from peers, from superiors, none of it compared to this. Recognition from a man who had lived in the same crucible, who knew the cost of every decision, who had entrusted her with his life. And now, his trust had become something larger. Word spread, first among special operations, then through the Air Force, then slowly through the entire chain of command. It was strange how fast legends moved. Within weeks, her name was spoken in briefing rooms she had never entered. SEAL teams, Delta operators, recon units, they began requesting her specifically. "We want Mitchell overhead." Even more startling was the change closer to home. The quiet condescension that had shadowed her career, the raised eyebrows, the whispered doubts, the dismissive jokes faded. No one called her a female pilot anymore. She was simply a pilot, and not just any pilot, the pilot. But respect, Sarah found, carried its own kind of burden. 3 weeks later, during a squadron meeting, a young lieutenant approached her, Rebecca Torres, nervous, eyes full of something Sarah recognized immediately, the uncertainty of someone standing on the threshold, wondering if they belonged. "Ma'am," Torres began, hesitating, "I heard about Thunder Ridge. I'm deploying next month. I was wondering if you could give me some advice about working with special operations units." Sarah studied her, and for a moment it was like looking into a mirror 15 years younger. She remembered the sting of being laughed at, the loneliness of the academy, the weight of every doubt she had carried into the sky. "Lieutenant," Sarah said softly, "special operations forces don't care about gender. They don't care about background. They care about results. Deliver precision fire support when their lives depend on it and you'll earn their respect. Fail and you won't. It's that simple." Torres nodded, swallowing hard. "How do you stay precise under pressure?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Training. You train until the hard becomes routine and the routine becomes instinct. When you're flying through a canyon at 400 miles per hour with people shooting at you, you don't have time to think. It has to be muscle memory." She watched the young woman absorb the words, hope mixing with fear, and Sarah realized something she hadn't considered before. She wasn't just flying missions anymore. She was becoming proof, proof that the door could be opened, proof that someone else could walk through it. That night, lying awake, she felt the dual weight pressing down, the pride of being a symbol and the fear of failing not just herself, but everyone who believed in her. The missions continued, more complex, more dangerous. Thompson's team requested her again and again until it became something unprecedented, a partnership. A pilot almost embedded with a SEAL team, planning and training alongside them, executing operations as one. Together, they pushed the boundaries of air-ground coordination. Together, they began developing tactics others would later study. And yet, with every success, the silence afterward grew heavier, the moments in the chapel longer, the questions in her mind sharper. Was she strong enough to carry this? Was she meant to be more than just a pilot, but a symbol? The Pentagon seemed to think so. General Patricia Williams flew in herself, requesting a private meeting. "Major Mitchell," she said, her voice crisp but not unkind, "your record with special operations has reached the highest levels. Mission success rates higher than anything on record. Zero friendly fire, minimal collateral damage. What you're doing is rewriting how we think about air support." Sarah felt the words land, but her instinct was to deflect. "It's not just me, ma'am. It's Captain Thompson's team. The partnership, that's what makes it work. The general's eyes softened just slightly. That humility is why we want you. The Pentagon is starting a new program, embedding Air Force pilots permanently with special operations. We want you to be the first, to help us write the book. It was more than an opportunity. It was a torch being handed. Sarah accepted, but afterward, when she sat in the stillness of her quarters, she felt the weight of the choice settle in. This wasn't just about flying anymore. This was about legacy. Her path had carried her from a small garage in Iowa to the mountains of Afghanistan, from grease-stained dreams to the most dangerous missions in modern warfare. But now, she stood on the edge of something larger. And she knew, with the clarity that had carried her through every trial, that her greatest test was still ahead. Somewhere in the Spinar Mountains, a mission was already being whispered about. A mission so dangerous, so complex, that even the most hardened warriors doubted it could succeed. And when the question was asked again, any combat pilots, Sarah knew she would rise. Quietly, deliberately, without apology. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why had the mission planners called it impossible? Sarah had heard the word before, whispered in hallways, spoken behind closed doors, scribbled in margins of briefing papers. Impossible. But in war, impossible was a dare. And tonight, that dare had been handed to her. The fortress sat like a beast in the Spinar Mountains. Rock walls on every side. Anti-aircraft weapons layered in rings. Bunkers tunneled into the stone. Intelligence claimed multiple high-value leaders were inside, coordinating attacks across 3 countries. Taking it out would change the war's tempo. Failing would cost everything. The operators gathered in the command room, SEALs, Deltas, Marines, controllers. Each man carried the look of someone who had seen death and walked away, but not without scars. Sarah was the only woman present. Still, she no longer felt like an intruder. She felt necessary. Captain Richardson, the mission commander, laid it out. Insertion by night, high altitude, precision timing. The only way in or out was the narrow valley. Helicopters couldn't survive the air defenses. Bombers would risk civilian villages. The mission needed a scalpel, not a hammer. Then came the question, the one that had echoed through her life. Any combat pilots here who think they can handle this? The silence was sharp, heavy, and then once again Sarah rose quietly. I can handle it, sir. No hesitation, no bravado, just fact. Richardson studied her for a long beat, then gave a single nod. Then it's yours. The planning consumed the next 72 hours, endless simulations, terrain maps studied until her eyes burned, every possible failure rehearsed until the only thing left was instinct. Thompson's SEAL team worked beside her, the trust between them now seamless. They didn't question her. They didn't doubt her. She was their pilot. On the final night, Sarah sat alone in the chapel. She didn't pray. She didn't ask. She simply whispered to the silence, "Let me be enough." Then she walked to her jet. The sky was moonless, black as ink. The F-16 lifted into it like a blade leaving its sheath. Sarah leveled off, sensors alive, eyes scanning the dark peaks rising ahead. Overwatch, this is ground team, Thompson's voice crackled through. Calm, steady. We're moving. Copy, she replied. I've got you. The valley opened like a throat before her. Narrow, treacherous. Radar lit up with threats. Surface-to-air locks screamed. She fired countermeasures, Dove banked. Missiles chased her, fell short, exploded against stone. Her breathing was even, her hands unshaking. She had trained for this moment her entire life. Ground team, she called, marking enemy emplacements. I'll clear the path. The fortress erupted, muzzle flashes from bunkers, rockets streaking upward. The air was alive with fire. Sarah descended into the chaos. Missiles left her wings, carving arcs of light. Each strike was precise, a bunker silenced, A gun nest shattered, a convoy crushed before it could move. Target 1 down, target 2 down, ground team advance. She spoke calmly, but inside she felt the razor edge. The line between success and annihilation. Every choice, every movement carried the weight of men's lives. The SEALs breached the compound. Close quarters battle erupted inside. Sarah circled above, listening to the fragmented comms. Shouts, gunfire, explosions. Then Thompson's voice. Overwatch, multiple reinforcements inbound from the North Ridge, will be cut off. She scanned vehicles, dozens of fighters, too many. Her eyes locked on the cliff walls, weak points, stress fractures. She remembered the avalanche, remembered the silence after. Ground team, she said, her voice steady, stand clear of the north wall. Overwatch. Trust me. She dove, released 3 missiles into the rock. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the mountain itself broke. Stone thundered down, swallowing the reinforcements, sealing the ridge. The valley went still. Overwatch, Thompson breathed. You just saved us again. But it wasn't over. Inside the compound, resistance stiffened. Explosions rocked the valley. The SEALs fought their way through, but extraction time was bleeding away. Sarah knew they needed a miracle, one final act to carve them a way out. Ground team, mark your exfil, she ordered. I'll cover. She dropped lower than ever before, her jet skimming the valley floor, wings nearly brushing stone. Cannon fire ripped through enemy positions within meters of the SEALs. Danger close didn't begin to cover it, but her strikes were perfect. Not one round touched friendlies. When the helicopters finally broke into the valley, Sarah was still overhead, firing, maneuvering, shielding. She didn't leave until the last bird lifted out, Thompson's voice cutting through the static. All teams exfil complete. Overwatch, you did it. Only then did she climb, leaving the burning valley behind. When she landed at Bagram, dawn was breaking. The hangar was filled with silence, the kind that comes after men witness something they cannot explain. Sarah climbed from the cockpit, sweat-soaked, exhausted. Thompson was waiting. His face was streaked with dirt, his gear still on. And in front of everyone, without a word, he saluted her again. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't ceremony, it was truth. The SEALs followed. One by one, hardened warriors saluting the woman who had carried them through the impossible. Sarah didn't bow, didn't cry. She simply nodded, her eyes steady, her silence stronger than words. History would remember Operation Thunder Ridge as a tactical masterpiece. Analysts would study the precision. Commanders would quote it in lectures. Historians would write about it in books. But those who were there remembered something else. They remembered the silence after Richardson's question, any combat pilots, and the woman who rose quietly, without fanfare, without apology. They remembered how she proved herself not by speeches, not by demands, but by performance so flawless it left men of war in awe. Years later, when young women in uniform asked Sarah Mitchell how she had done it, she never spoke of medals or missions. She only said, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And that was her legacy. Not thunder, not fire, but the quiet rise of someone who had been told she didn't belong and who answered the world not with words but with flight.